My daughter wanted to move into my house. When I refused, her husband hurled a solid oak chair right at my head. "You are so selfish," my daughter screamed as blood poured down my face. I locked myself in the bathroom, calmly drove to the emergency room, and texted my lawyer. Phase 1 is complete. An hour later, the police kicked my front door off its hinges. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Now let me tell you how a 70-year-old retired contractor ended up bleeding in his own dining room just to trap the monsters living under his roof. I am Harrison Caldwell. I am 70 years old, a widower, and a retired commercial contractor. I live in Fairfax, Virginia, in a $2.5 million estate that I built from the ground up. I do not mean I just paid for it. I mean my own sweat is in the foundation. I poured the concrete. I framed the walls. I laid every plank of the Brazilian cherry hardwood floors. This house was a promise I made to my late wife, Martha. It was our sanctuary. Since cancer took her from me a few years ago, the quiet of this big house has been my only comfort. It was a Tuesday morning, and the air was crisp. I was sitting on the wrap around front porch, drinking my black coffee, looking out over the front yard. Martha used to spend hours tending to her prize hydrangeas lining the driveway. They were blooming beautifully large clusters of blue and violet that reminded me of her every single day. I was finding peace in the silence. Then the silence was shattered. The aggressive roar of an engine ripped through the quiet neighborhood. A sleek black Range Rover came speeding around the corner, taking the turn far too wide. It was my son-in-law, Derek. He drove that expensive, heavily financed SUV like he owned the entire world, despite the fact that I knew he was drowning in car payments. He did not even slow down as he turned into my driveway. The heavy tires veered off the paved asphalt and plowed right into the flower bed. I watched in absolute horror as the heavy vehicle crushed Martha's beautiful hydrangeas, snapping the stems and grinding the delicate petals into the dark soil. He slammed on the brakes, leaving deep, muddy tire tracks across the edge of the lawn. I stood up, my grip tightening on my coffee mug. The sheer disrespect of it made my blood boil. But before I could even say a word, the passenger door flew open. Out stepped my daughter, Rachel. She did not look apologetic. She did not even look at the ruined flowers. She just marched up the front steps, her designer sunglasses pushed back on her head, holding an iced coffee. She did not say good morning. She did not ask how I was doing. She just walked past me, pulling her phone from her designer handbag. Right behind her, Derek hopped out of the driver's seat. He popped the trunk and began hauling out massive, heavy suitcases. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 oversized bags. He dragged them unceremoniously onto the porch, breathing heavily, completely, ignoring the muddy footprints his expensive loafers were leaving on the pristine wood. I stood there staring at the mountain of luggage. "What is going on here?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, though a storm was brewing inside me. Rachel turned around, sighing, as if my question was an unbelievable inconvenience. "Our landlord sold the rental house, Dad," she said, her tone completely flat. "The new owners want to renovate, so they did not renew our lease. We have nowhere else to go. We are moving in here with you." She stated it as a fact. Not a question, not a request, a declaration. There was no phone call the night before. No polite conversation asking if her grieving 70-year-old father minded having his peace disrupted. Just a sudden invasion. I looked at Derek, who was struggling to pull the 5th suitcase up the porch stairs. He did not even have the decency to look me in the eye. He just grunted and shoved the bag forward. "No," I said. My voice was not loud, but it was absolute. Rachel blinked, her perfect posture faltering for a fraction of a second. "Excuse me," I said. "No," I repeated, stepping squarely in front of the front door, blocking their path. "You are not moving in here. This is my home. You cannot just show up with your entire life packed in suitcases and expect me to open the door. You should have called. You should have asked. And even if you had the answer, would still be no." Rachel's face flushed with immediate anger. "Dad, are you serious right now?" We literally have nowhere to go. We are your family. You are sitting alone in a 5-bedroom mansion. It makes zero sense for us to pay ridiculous rent somewhere else when you have all this empty space. It is not empty space to me, Rachel, I replied, fighting the urge to raise my voice. It is my home. The home I built with your mother. I like my peace. I like my routine. I am not turning my sanctuary into a boarding house for you and your husband. Derek dropped the handle of the suitcase he was holding. He puffed out his chest, stepping forward to close the distance between us. He was a younger man, taller than me, and he tried to use his physical presence to intimidate me. But I had spent 40 years on commercial construction sites dealing with men twice his size and 10 times as tough. I did not move a single inch. Are you kidding me right now, Harrison? Derek sneered, his voice dripping with venom. You are a 70-year-old man living alone in a massive house that you do not even use. You just rattle around in here by yourself. Stop being so selfish. We need a place to stay. Selfish. I looked at this boy, this entitled kid who drove a car he could barely afford, standing on the porch I built, calling me selfish. I worked 70-hour weeks for 40 years to afford this life. I paid cash for every brick and every beam. I paid for Rachel's Ivy League education in full so she would not start her life in debt. I paid for the extravagant wedding you two demanded. And now you destroy my late wife's garden, march up to my door, and call me selfish. Derek glared at me, his face turning a dark shade of crimson. He aggressively grabbed the heaviest suitcase, hauling it upward with a violent yank. Instead of carrying it over the threshold, he deliberately dropped it right onto the Brazilian cherry hardwood floor of the entryway. The heavy metal wheels and hard plastic shell slammed into the wood with a sickening crunch. I winced as the sound echoed through the quiet house. I knew without even looking that he had just left a deep, permanent gouge in the floorboards I had installed and polished with my own 2 hands. He did it on purpose. It was a show of dominance, a petty, destructive act to let me know he did not respect me or the things I valued. Oops, Derek said, a nasty, mocking smirk spreading across his face. Slipped. My hands curled into tight fists. I could feel the adrenaline pumping through my veins. Every instinct I had honed over decades of hard work told me to grab him by his expensive collar and throw him physically off my property. I wanted to drag him down the steps and toss him right into the mud he had tracked across my lawn. I stepped right up to Derek, my face inches from his. Pick that bag up, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, quiet rumble. Pick it up, turn around, and get off my property before I call the police and have you arrested for trespassing. Derek scoffed, but I saw a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. He realized I was not the frail pushover old man he thought I was. But before he could respond, the dynamic suddenly shifted. Rachel pushed past Derek. The cold, entitled demeanor vanished in an instant. Her face crumbled, her eyes filling with sudden, desperate tears. She fell to her knees right there on the scratched hardwood floor, grabbing my hand with a grip so tight it hurt. "Dad, please," she sobbed, her voice breaking into a hysterical, breathless panic. "Please, you do not understand. You have to let us stay here. If you do not let us in, they are going to kill Derek." The words hit me like a physical blow. The anger drained out of me, replaced by a sudden, icy shock. I froze, staring down at my weeping daughter. The tears looked real. The terror in her voice sounded genuine. I looked from Rachel to Derek, who had suddenly grown very pale and was looking away, refusing to meet my gaze. The mention of a death threat paralyzed me. My mind raced. Who was going to kill him? What kind of trouble had they brought to my doorstep? Despite the disrespect, despite the ruined flowers and the scratched floor, she was still my daughter. Martha's dying wish had been for me to protect her. And in that split second of hesitation, a father's instinct overrode a man's pride. I did not know it then, but agreeing to let them through that door was the biggest mistake of my life. I was letting the enemy inside my gates. I stepped back, dropping my hand. Derek shoved past me, dragging his heavy luggage over the threshold. The hard wheels ground against the cherry wood, leaving a trail of scuffs. Rachel followed without a word of thanks. She simply walked straight toward the kitchen, not looking back, tossing her expensive handbag onto the granite island. I closed the door, the lock clicking like a prison gate. I followed them into the dining room, anchored by a custom solid oak table Martha and I had picked out. Derek stood next to it, hands on his hips, looking around with blatant entitlement. He did not look like a man fearing for his life. "You have all this space," Derek muttered. He aggressively kicked the leg of the oak dining table with his leather loafer. "It makes absolutely no sense. You are a 70-year-old man living alone in a 5-bedroom mansion. Stop being so selfish. We deserve to be here just as much as you do." My jaw clenched. I took a deliberate step toward him. "Do not ever kick my furniture," I said, my voice dangerously low. "And do not ever call me selfish in the house my sweat paid for. I paid $200,000 in cash for Rachel to earn her Ivy League degree. I wrote a check for $100,000 for that lavish wedding you insisted on having. I gave you every head start a father could possibly give." Derek scoffed, crossing his arms. "Oh, here we go again. The grand tale of the hard-working contractor." He rolled his eyes, his tone dripping with absolute condescension. "We get it, Harrison. You worked with your hands. You got dirt under your fingernails. But the world has moved on. Blue-collar money does not buy class, and it clearly does not buy empathy. We are talking about my life here." I turned to Rachel. She stood by the refrigerator, letting her husband speak to me like a stray dog. "If your life is in danger," I said, maintaining my composure, "then tell me exactly who is threatening you. Who wants to kill you, Derek?" Rachel stepped forward, her face twisting into a mask of desperate sorrow. "It is his tech startup dad," she said, her voice trembling. The launch failed. The investors pulled out, and Derek had to take out a bridge loan to keep the servers running. We owe $50,000 to an aggressive private bank. They are not like normal bankers. They hire dangerous people. They said if we do not pay them back by the end of the month, they are going to make an example out of Derek. I stared at her, my mind working through the logistics. I had dealt with banks and financiers for 4 decades. Private banks, even aggressive ones, did not threaten to murder people over a $50,000 loan. They filed lawsuits. They placed liens on assets. They ruined credit scores. They did not send hitmen. The math simply did not add up. But I looked at her pale face, and the memory of Martha asking me to look after our daughter echoed in my mind. I could not turn her away if there was even a fraction of a chance she was in danger. "Fine," I said, pulling away from her touch. "You can stay. But you are staying on my terms." Rachel breathed a sigh of relief, but I held up a hand to stop her. "You have exactly 6 months," I stated firmly. "Not 1 day more. You will use that time to pay off this supposed debt and find a new place. Furthermore, Derek, you will get a real job. Not a startup, not a scheme, but actual employment. And lastly, my private home office at the end of the hall is strictly off-limits to both of you. You do not go in there for any reason." Derek smirked, an arrogant twist of his lips, showing zero intention of following my rules. "Sure thing, boss," he mocked lightly. 6 months. Do not worry, we will be out of your precious hair before you know it." They grabbed their bags and headed upstairs, leaving me standing alone in the dining room. I looked down at the scratch on my hardwood floor, a sinking feeling settling in my stomach. Against my better judgment, I had opened my doors to them. I had surrendered my peace. That night, the house felt heavy, oppressive, like the thick air before a storm. I tossed and turned, staring at the ceiling. Her story kept replaying in my mind over and over. $50,000, private banks, hitmen. It was a poorly constructed lie, and my gut instinct screamed that I was missing a massive piece of the puzzle. By 3 a.m, sleep was a lost cause. My throat was dry, so I slipped out of bed to get a glass of cold water. I did not turn on the hallway lights. I knew every inch of this house by heart, having framed the very walls I was walking past. As I moved silently down the carpeted corridor, I noticed a faint red light dancing near the floorboards ahead of me. I stopped pressing my back flat against the wall, holding my breath. A few yards away, bathed in the pale moonlight, stood Derek. He was standing right outside the closed door of my master bedroom. In his hand, he held a digital laser tape measure, the exact kind contractors use to map out room dimensions. He pressed the button, sending a sharp red beam across the floor, straight toward the gap under my door. He checked the digital readout, muttered under his breath, and typed a note into his phone. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice slicing through the silent darkness like a blade. Derek jumped, nearly dropping the laser measure. He spun around, his eyes wide with shock. He quickly hid the device behind his back, his chest heaving. "Oh, Harrison," he stammered, his arrogant tone replaced by a nervous flutter. "You startled me. I could not sleep. I was just measuring the hallway." "Measuring the hallway at 3 a.m, I asked, taking a slow step toward him. "Yeah," he said, forcing a weak laugh. "Rachel and I have this old runner rug from our last place. I just wanted to see if it would fit here. You know, to protect your precious floors." I looked at him, my expression blank. I knew for an absolute fact that they had thrown away all their rugs before packing. I had seen the empty trash bags sitting on their curb last week. Derek was lying straight to my face. He was not measuring for a rug. He was measuring the exact distance from the staircase to my bedroom door. He was calculating how long it would take to reach me in the dark. "Right," I said coldly. "Go back to sleep, Derek." He scurried away down the hall like a frightened rat. I watched him go, the realization crashing over me. They had brought the danger directly to my door. The heavy oak door clicked shut, sealing us inside. I stood staring at the 5 massive suitcases cluttering my entryway. The silence of my sanctuary had been shattered, replaced by the anxious breathing of my daughter and the sullen silence of my son-in-law. Rachel wiped her face, a flash of relief replacing the terror she displayed moments ago. Derek did not say a word of gratitude. He simply picked up the heaviest suitcase, the one he had dropped on my floor, and began dragging it toward the grand staircase. The wheels ground against the polished wood. "Stop right there," I commanded, my voice slicing through the tension like a blade. Derek froze, his foot hovering over the bottom step. He slowly turned his head, annoyance written on his face. I pointed to the hallway leading to the guest wing. "You are not going upstairs," I stated firmly. "The upper floor is my private space. You will take the guest bedroom on the ground floor. It has enough space for what you brought. This house stays clean, and it stays orderly." Rachel rushed forward, placing a hand on my arm. "Of course, Dad," she murmured quickly. "We will keep to ourselves. We just need a safe place to figure things out." I looked into her eyes. "I love you, Rachel," I said softly. "But I am not a fool. If someone is truly trying to kill Derek over a failed business loan, we need to call the police right now. We need to file a report and get professional protection." I reached into my pocket for my phone. "No!" Rachel gasped, her voice shrill with panic. She grabbed my wrist, stopping me. "No police, Dad. Please. You do not understand these people. If we involve the authorities, they will know. They have people everywhere. It will only make things worse. We just need time to lay low and gather the funds to pay them back." I studied her face carefully. The fear seemed real, but the logic was entirely flawed. Normal hard money lenders did not operate like a cartel movie. However, the sheer desperation in her grip made me pause. "Fine," I agreed, reluctantly slipping my phone away. "But we are setting ground rules right now. You have exactly 6 months to resolve this mess and find a new place, not 1 day more. And Derek, you will get a physical job immediately. No more imaginary tech startups. You will earn an honest wage until this debt is cleared." Derek let out a heavy sigh, rolling his eyes as he adjusted his grip on the suitcase. "Yeah, sure. Whatever you say, Harrison," he muttered. He turned and began dragging the luggage down the hall toward the guest suite. I stood alone in the foyer, the quiet of the house returning, but it felt entirely different now. It was not a peaceful silence. It was a heavy, suffocating quiet, pregnant with unspoken secrets and lingering resentment. I walked into the kitchen, poured my cold coffee down the sink, and gripped the edge of the counter. I had allowed them into my home out of a father's instinct to protect, but my gut screamed that I had just made a catastrophic error. The rest of the day passed in a tense blur. They remained hidden in the guest room, unpacking and speaking in hushed, urgent whispers. I stayed in my study, a large room at the end of the east hallway. It was my personal retreat, lined with bookshelves, a heavy mahogany desk, and a large safe containing my important documents. I locked the door, finding comfort in the solid click of the deadbolt. When evening fell, the atmosphere grew even more oppressive. We ate dinner in near silence. Derek picked at his food, his face buried in his smartphone, completely ignoring basic table etiquette. Rachel attempted to force a cheerful conversation, but the words felt hollow and painfully rehearsed. Every time I looked at Derek, I saw a profound, unearned arrogance masking what should have been absolute humiliation. He did not look like a man hiding from violent loan sharks. He looked like an entitled brat, annoyed by his accommodations. I went to bed early, locking my bedroom door out of a newly formed habit. Sleep, however, completely eluded me. I tossed and turned the events of the day, replaying in my mind. Rachel's sudden tears, the specific threat of murder over a relatively small business debt, Derek's blatant disrespect. The pieces of the puzzle did not fit together. By 3 a.m, the silence of the house was absolute. I got up for a glass of water. I did not turn on the hallway lights. I moved silently, my bare feet making no sound on the carpet. As I approached the top of the stairs, I noticed a faint red light dancing near the floorboards in the hallway below. I stopped, pressing my back flat against the wall, holding my breath. I crept down the stairs, peering around the corner. A few yards away, bathed in the pale moonlight filtering through the windows, stood Derek. He was standing directly outside the closed door of my private study. In his hand, he held a digital laser tape measure. He pressed the button, sending a sharp red beam across the floor, straight toward the gap under the door. He checked the digital readout, muttered under his breath, and quickly typed a note into his phone. He then aimed the laser at the door hinges and the heavy deadbolt, measuring the precise dimensions of the solid wood frame. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice slicing through the darkness like a blade. Derek jumped, nearly dropping the laser measure. He spun around, his eyes wide with sudden shock. He quickly shoved the device behind his back, his chest heaving as he tried to compose himself. "Oh, Harrison," he stammered, his arrogant tone replaced by a nervous flutter. "You startled me." I could not sleep. I was just measuring the hallway. Measuring the hallway at 3 a.m, I asked, taking a slow, deliberate step toward him. "Yeah," he said, forcing a weak laugh. "Rachel and I have this old runner rug from our last place. I just wanted to see if it would fit here. You know, to protect your precious floors." I looked at him, my expression completely blank. I knew for a fact, though, that they had thrown away all their rugs before packing. Derek was lying straight to my face. He was not measuring for a runner rug. He was measuring the exact dimensions of my locked study door. He was calculating what it would take to breach my private space. "Right," I said coldly, never breaking eye contact. "Just go back to sleep, Derek." He scurried away down the hall like a frightened rat, disappearing into the guest suite. I stood alone in the dark, the cold realization crashing over me with terrifying clarity. They were not hiding from violent loan sharks. They were hiding a much darker agenda, and I was their primary target. My peaceful sanctuary had officially become a dangerous war zone. The next morning, the heavy atmosphere in the house felt completely suffocating. I sat at the kitchen island, staring down at a mug of black coffee, listening to the rhythmic hum of the refrigerator. My mind kept returning to Derek in the dark hallway, his laser measure glowing red against my bedroom door. I knew I needed to keep my expressions unreadable. When Derek finally dragged himself downstairs, he avoided my gaze entirely, grabbing a protein bar and retreating to the living room. Rachel, however, was behaving entirely out of character. She floated into the kitchen wearing a bright, cheerful smile that did not quite reach her eyes. She hummed a light tune as she began pulling pans from the cabinets, offering to cook me a lavish breakfast. I declined politely, stating I just needed to grab the morning mail. I walked down the long driveway to the ornate brick mailbox near the street. The crisp Virginia air usually brought me peace, but today it offered no comfort. I opened the heavy metal door and pulled out a stack of envelopes. Most were standard bills and local advertisements. But near the bottom of the pile, a thick black envelope caught my immediate attention. It was addressed directly to Derek. The return address was printed in bold silver lettering. Apex Funding. My breath caught in my throat. I stood perfectly still on the edge of the driveway, staring at the sinister envelope. During my 40 years as a commercial contractor, I had seen many men lose their businesses to bad debt. Apex Funding was not a legitimate bank or a standard investment firm. They were notorious hard money lenders operating in the shadows of the Virginia financial sector. They were deeply connected to the criminal underworld, utilizing ruthless, violent tactics to collect on their loans. Derek had lied to me. He did not owe money to a desperate tech investor. He was in bed with the mob. I tucked the black envelope into my coat pocket and walked back inside the house, my mind racing with terrifying possibilities. I found Rachel standing near the kitchen sink. She was holding my orange prescription bottle, the heart medication my cardiologist had prescribed to keep my blood pressure stable. Before I could say a word, she casually tossed the entire plastic bottle into the trash can. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice tight with suppressed alarm. "Those are my daily prescriptions." Rachel turned to me, her face glowing with manufactured affection. "Do not worry about those cheap generic pills, Dad," she said in a sickeningly sweet tone. "I was reading up on heart health last night, and those commercial drugs do more harm than good. I bought you something much better." She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a sleek, unmarked silver pillbox. She opened it and handed me a large, clear capsule filled with a fine white powder. "These are premium imported supplements. They are completely natural and cost a fortune. I bought them just for you. I want you to be healthy and strong so we can enjoy this time together." I looked down at the capsule resting in the palm of my hand. The plastic casing felt cold. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to drop it. The sudden shift in her behavior, the discarded prescription, the mysterious powder, it all painted a deeply disturbing picture. But I knew I could not reveal my suspicions. If I confronted her now, she would simply invent another lie. "Thank you, Rachel," I said, forcing a grateful smile. "That is very thoughtful of you." I raised my hand to my mouth, pretending to toss the capsule back. I took a large gulp of water from my glass, making a show of swallowing it down. But in reality, I had smoothly slipped the capsule under my tongue. Rachel watched my throat bob with intense, unblinking focus. When I set the glass down, her shoulders relaxed, and that fake, chilling smile returned to her face. I excused myself, claiming I needed to get dressed for some morning errands. Once I was safely locked inside my bathroom, I spat the intact capsule into a tissue, wrapping it carefully and shoving it deep into my pocket. An hour later, I drove my truck toward the center of Fairfax. I parked in front of my primary bank, the institution that held my most important documents, including my property deed and my final will. I walked straight to the manager's office. Sarah, the branch manager I had known for over 15 years, greeted me with a warm, familiar smile. "Harrison, it is always a pleasure to see you," she said, gesturing for me to sit down. "I assume you are here about the safe deposit box I wanted to call you, but I figured everything was sorted out." I frowned, gripping the armrests of the leather chair. "Sorted out? What do you mean, Sarah?" Her smile faltered, replaced by a look of mild confusion. "I am so sorry we could not help Rachel yesterday," she explained gently. "She came in right before closing time. She said your mobility was declining, and you needed her to retrieve some vital real estate documents from your box. She presented a power of attorney form, but unfortunately it lacked a legitimate notary seal. Our policy is very strict on these matters, so I had to turn her away. I assumed she went home to have you fix the paperwork." The blood drained entirely from my face. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. "I never drafted a power of attorney, Sarah," I said, my voice barely above an absolute whisper. "I never authorized Rachel to access my box, and my mobility is perfectly fine." Sarah gasped, her professional demeanor shattering into genuine alarm. "Harrison, she presented a document with your signature on it. It looked identical to the signature we have on file. If you did not sign that paper, then your daughter attempted to commit severe financial fraud against your accounts." I sat in the sterile office, struggling to pull oxygen into my lungs. They were not just looking for a place to crash. They were actively trying to steal my entire estate. The forged signature, the mob debt, the sinister hallway measurements. It was a coordinated, deliberate attack on everything I had spent my life building. I instructed Sarah to place a maximum security freeze on all my accounts. I walked out of the bank in a complete daze, my mind completely numb from the horrific revelation. I climbed into my heavy truck, locked the doors tightly, and slowly pulled out the tissue containing the capsule. Using my thumbnails, I carefully pried the halves apart. I brought the open capsule directly to my nose and took a shallow sniff. The scent was revolting. It smelled sharp, metallic, and heavily chemical, like a toxic industrial solvent. My stomach churned violently as the horrific reality finally set in. I was sharing my home with two desperate people actively planning my murder. They wanted a deadly game, but they severely underestimated the man they were trying to eliminate. I did not return home immediately. Instead, I drove my truck across county lines to a private toxicology laboratory in Alexandria. I had used their services years ago for corporate drug testing on my construction sites. I walked into the sterile, brightly lit reception area and asked to speak directly with the head toxicologist. I placed a crisp $100 bill on the counter alongside the wrapped tissue containing the capsule. I told him I needed a chemical breakdown of the powder inside, and I needed it immediately. He told me an expedited analysis would take a few hours. I sat in the waiting room drinking terrible vending machine coffee, feeling the cold weight of betrayal settling deep into my bones. My own daughter. The girl I had taught to ride a bicycle. The girl I had walked down the aisle. She was actively participating in a plot to end my life. After 3 agonizing hours, the toxicologist called me into his office. His face was grave. He placed a printed report on his desk and looked at me with genuine concern. The powder in that capsule was not a dietary supplement. It was a highly concentrated synthetic compound designed to trigger a massive rapid spike in blood pressure. If a man of my age and medical history ingested that amount, it would almost certainly induce a fatal myocardial infarction. A heart attack. It would look completely natural to any standard medical examiner. They were not trying to slowly poison me. They were trying to execute a precise, untraceable assassination. I thanked the doctor, folded the report into my breast pocket, and walked out to my truck. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a profound, terrifying rage. I pulled out my phone and dialed Gregory Holt. Gregory was not just my attorney. He was a former prosecutor and one of the sharpest legal minds in Virginia. We had fought many battles together. I told him I needed an emergency meeting. We met at a quiet, dimly lit booth in the back of a local steakhouse. I slid the toxicology report and the notes from my bank visit across the polished mahogany table. Gregory read through the documents, his expression hardening with every passing second. He took off his reading glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Harrison," he said, his voice hushed and urgent. "This is attempted murder and felony fraud. We need to call the authorities right now. We need to get a police escort to your house and throw them out onto the street." I shook my head, my jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached. "If we call the police right now, what exactly happens, Gregory?" I asked. "Rachel will cry. Derek will play dumb. They will claim they bought the supplements online and had no idea they were dangerous. They will claim the forged power of attorney was a misunderstanding, that I had verbally given them permission and simply forgot. The police will take a report, but they will not arrest them tonight without hard, irrefutable proof of intent." Gregory sighed heavily, leaning forward. You are right. Without a recorded confession or a direct violent action, a savvy defense attorney will spin this as a tragic misunderstanding. But Harrison, you cannot go back to that house. You cannot sleep under the same roof as two people actively plotting your murder. We have to evict them immediately. Evict them! I scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. I want them gone today. I want to change the locks and throw their designer bags onto the front lawn. You cannot do that, Gregory warned, his tone dead serious. Under Virginia law, they have been in your home long enough to establish basic tenant rights. If you change the locks or throw their property outside, they will call the police on you for an illegal self-help eviction. The officers will force you to let them back inside. To remove them legally, we would have to serve them with a 30-day notice file, an unlawful detainer in civil court, and wait for a judge to grant an eviction order. The entire process could take up to 6 months. 6 months. I stared at Gregory, the sheer absurdity of the legal system washing over me. You are telling me that I have to live with my would-be murderers for half a year, while a judge decides if I am allowed to kick them out of the house I built. During those 6 months, they will have access to my food, my water, my daily routine. They will have thousands of opportunities to slip that poison into my life. I will be a prisoner in my own sanctuary, waiting for the executioner to strike. Gregory looked at me with deep sympathy. The law is designed to protect tenants from abusive landlords, Harrison. It does not account for sociopathic family members. If you want them out of that house tonight permanently, without going through a civil eviction, you need them removed in handcuffs. You need them charged with a violent felony. A felony arrest triggers automatic protective orders. It revokes their right to the property immediately. But to get a felony arrest, we need absolute, undeniable evidence of a crime in progress. I looked down at my scarred, calloused hands. Hands that had built skyscrapers. Hands that had carried my daughter when she was too tired to walk. I had spent my entire life building and protecting. Now I had to become the predator. I needed to hunt the people living in my guest room. I looked up at Gregory, my decision made. I do not just want them evicted, Gregory. I want them destroyed. I want them in federal prison. Prepare the paperwork for a restraining order. Have it ready to file the moment I give the word. I am going to get you your undeniable evidence. The sun rose over Fairfax, casting long shadows across my manicured lawn. I had not slept a single wink since my encounter with Derek in the hallway. My mind was operating with the cold mechanical precision I reserved for complex structural engineering problems. Every creak of the floorboards, every hushed whisper from the guest suite below was a new data point. I needed to understand the true architecture of their lie. I brewed my coffee in absolute silence, stepping out onto the porch to collect the morning mail. The crisp Virginia air usually brought clarity, but today it felt incredibly heavy with impending dread. I opened the ornate brick mailbox and pulled out a thick stack of envelopes. Shuffling through the standard utility bills and local advertisements, my hands suddenly stopped. Nestled near the bottom of the pile was a thick, dark envelope addressed directly to Derek. The return address was printed in bold silver lettering that sent a sharp chill straight down my spine. Apex Funding. During my 40 years as a commercial contractor, you hear countless whispers on job sites. You quickly learn the names of specific financial institutions that legitimate businessmen avoid at all costs. Apex Funding was not a traditional bank or a standard investment firm. They were notorious hard money lenders operating in the darkest shadows of the financial sector, deeply connected to the criminal underworld. They did not issue polite collection notices or make courtesy phone calls. They utilized ruthless, violent tactics to collect on their debts. The story Rachel had spun about a failed tech startup and a simple business loan was a complete fabrication. Derek had borrowed money from people who broke legs and ruined lives. He was deeply in bed with the mob. I tucked the sinister envelope into my coat pocket and walked back inside, my mind racing with terrifying possibilities. As I entered the kitchen, Rachel was standing by the marble island. She was behaving entirely out of character, floating around the room with a bright, cheerful smile that did not quite reach her cold eyes. She hummed a light tune, pouring a glass of freshly squeezed orange juice. Then I watched in absolute disbelief as she picked up my orange prescription bottle. It was the vital heart medication my cardiologist had prescribed to keep my blood pressure stable. Without a second of hesitation, Rachel casually tossed the entire plastic bottle directly into the trash can. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice tight with suppressed alarm. "Those are my daily prescriptions." Rachel turned to me, her face glowing with manufactured affection. "Do not worry about those cheap, generic pills, Dad," she said in a sickeningly sweet tone. "I was reading up on heart health last night, and those commercial drugs do more harm than good. I bought you something much better." She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a sleek, unmarked silver pillbox. She opened it and handed me a large, clear capsule filled with a fine, granular white powder. "These are premium imported supplements," she continued smoothly. "They are completely natural and cost an absolute fortune. I bought them just for you. I want you to be healthy and strong so we can enjoy this time together." I looked down at the capsule resting in the palm of my hand. The plastic casing felt unnervingly cold against my skin. Every survival instinct in my body screamed at me to drop it immediately. The sudden drastic shift in her behavior, the discarded prescription, the mysterious white powder. It all painted a deeply disturbing, terrifying picture. But I knew I could not reveal my suspicions right now. If I confronted her, she would simply invent another lie and cover her tracks completely. "Thank you, Rachel," I said, forcing a grateful, oblivious smile. "That is very thoughtful of you." I raised my hand to my mouth, pretending to toss the capsule to the back of my throat. I took a large gulp of orange juice, making an exaggerated show of swallowing it down. But in reality, with the desperate sleight of hand of a man fighting for his life, I had smoothly slipped the capsule under my tongue. Rachel watched my throat bob with intense, unblinking focus. When I set the glass down, her shoulders visibly relaxed, and that fake, chilling smile returned to her face. I excused myself, claiming I needed to get dressed for some morning errands. Once I was safely locked inside my master bathroom, I spat the intact capsule into a tissue, wrapping it carefully and shoving it deep into my pocket. I needed answers, and I needed to secure the assets I had worked my entire life to build. An hour later, I drove my heavy truck toward the center of Fairfax. I parked in front of my primary bank, the institution that held my most important financial documents, my retirement accounts, and my final will inside a maximum security safe deposit box. I walked straight to the branch manager's office. Sarah, a woman I had known and done business with for over 15 years, greeted me with a warm, familiar smile. "Harrison, it is always a pleasure to see you," she said, gesturing for me to sit down in the leather chair across from her mahogany desk. "I assume you are here about the safe deposit box. I wanted to call you earlier, but I figured everything was sorted out." I frowned, my hands gripping the armrests tightly. "Sorted out? What do you mean, Sarah?" Her smile faltered instantly, replaced by a look of genuine, mild confusion. "I am so sorry we could not help Rachel yesterday," she explained gently, her tone completely professional. "She came in right before closing time. She told me your mobility was rapidly declining and that you needed her to retrieve some vital real estate documents from your box. She presented a formal power of attorney, but unfortunately, it lacked a legitimate notary seal. Our policy is very strict on these matters, so I had to turn her away. I assumed she went home to have you fix the paperwork." The blood drained entirely from my face. The walls of the office seemed to tilt on their axis, the ambient noise of the bank fading into a high-pitched ringing in my ears. "I never drafted a power of attorney, Sarah," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh, breathless whisper. "I never authorized Rachel to access my box, and my mobility is perfectly fine." Sarah gasped, her professional demeanor shattering into absolute alarm. "Harrison, she presented a legal document with your signature on it. It looked identical to the signature we have on file. If you did not sign that paper, then your daughter attempted to commit severe financial fraud against your accounts." I sat in the sterile office, struggling to pull oxygen into my lungs. They were not just looking for a place to crash. They were actively trying to steal my entire estate. The forged signature, the mob debt, the sinister hallway measurements. It was a coordinated, deliberate attack on everything I had spent my life building. I instructed Sarah to immediately place a maximum security fraud freeze on all my accounts, revoking any and all authorized user access regardless of the documentation presented. I walked out of the bank in a complete daze, my mind completely numb from the horrific revelation. I climbed into my heavy truck, locked the doors tightly, and started the engine to mask the sound of my own erratic breathing. I slowly pulled out the tissue containing the capsule Rachel had given me. Using my thumbnails, I carefully pried the two plastic halves apart. I brought the open capsule directly to my nose and took a shallow sniff. The scent was revolting. It did not smell like vitamins or herbal supplements. It smelled sharp, metallic, and heavily chemical, like a toxic industrial solvent. My stomach churned violently as the horrific reality finally set in. I was sharing my home with two desperate people actively planning my murder. They wanted a deadly game, but they severely underestimated the man they were trying to eliminate. I did not return to my house. Instead, I put my heavy truck in gear and drove straight across county lines toward Alexandria. My destination was a private toxicology laboratory I had utilized years ago for corporate drug testing on my commercial construction sites. The drive was a blur of suffocating anxiety. I parked in the sterile lot and walked through the heavy glass doors into the brightly lit reception area. The facility smelled of bleach and antiseptic, a stark contrast to the metallic stench of the capsule burning a hole in my pocket. I demanded to speak directly with the head toxicologist, a man named Dr. Aris. When he finally appeared in the lobby, looking exhausted, I did not offer pleasantries. I placed a crisp $100 bill on his pristine counter, next to the wrapped tissue containing the capsule Rachel had handed me that morning. I told him I needed a comprehensive chemical breakdown of the granular white powder inside that plastic casing, and I needed the results immediately. He looked at the cash, then at my unyielding expression, and agreed to expedite the analysis process. He told me the expedited testing would take a few agonizing hours. I sat alone in the empty waiting room, staring blankly at the faded beige walls. I purchased a cup of bitter coffee from a humming vending machine in the corner, but I could not bring myself to take a single sip. My mind was consumed by a dark, swirling storm of absolute betrayal. This was my own daughter. This was the little girl I had taught to ride a bicycle in our driveway. This was the young woman I had proudly walked down the aisle, the child I had protected and provided for her entire life. She was not just a passive bystander in some misguided financial scheme. She was an active, willing participant in a calculated plot to end my life. She had looked me directly in the eyes, smiled with manufactured affection, and handed me a fatal dose of poison, all while claiming it was a premium health supplement. The sheer sociopathic nature of her deception was difficult to process. I felt a cold, heavy weight settling deep into my bones, extinguishing the last embers of paternal warmth I held for her. She had chosen her path, aligning herself with a ruthless criminal and his mob debt. After 3 excruciating hours of silent contemplation, Dr. Aris finally called me into his private back office. His face was exceptionally grave, the professional detachment replaced by a look of profound concern. He gestured for me to sit down in the metal chair across from his desk. He carefully placed a printed, detailed laboratory report between us and tapped the page with his pen. The powder inside that capsule was not a dietary supplement, a vitamin, or anything remotely related to health and wellness. He explained, his voice low and serious. It was a highly concentrated synthetic chemical compound specifically designed to trigger a massive, uncontrollable spike in blood pressure. He looked at me, assessing my age and physical condition. If a man of your demographic and medical history ingested that precise amount of the compound, he stated firmly, it would almost certainly induce a sudden catastrophic myocardial infarction, a fatal heart attack. Furthermore, the chemical was designed to break down rapidly in the human bloodstream. By the time a standard medical examiner performed a routine autopsy, it would look like a completely natural, tragic medical event. They were executing a precise, virtually untraceable assassination. I thanked the doctor, my voice remarkably steady despite the hurricane of rage tearing through my chest. I carefully folded the official toxicology report, sliding it into my breast pocket, alongside the notes I had taken regarding the forged bank documents. I walked out of the sterile laboratory and back to my waiting truck. My hands were shaking as I gripped the steering wheel, but the tremors were not born from fear. They were born from a terrifying anger. I pulled out my mobile phone and immediately dialed Gregory Holt. Gregory was not just my personal attorney. He was a former county prosecutor and one of the sharpest, most aggressive legal minds in the state of Virginia. We had fought many difficult corporate battles together over the decades. When he answered, I skipped the standard greetings entirely. I told him I had a situation of life and death, and I needed an emergency face-to-face meeting right now. We met an hour later at a quiet, dimly lit booth, tucked away in the back corner of a local upscale steakhouse in downtown Fairfax. The lunch rush had ended, leaving the restaurant mostly empty and perfectly suited for a discreet, confidential conversation. I did not bother ordering food or a drink. I simply reached into my pocket and slid the folded toxicology report across the polished mahogany table. Then I detailed the terrifying morning I had experienced. I explained the black envelope from Apex Funding, the notorious mob-connected hard money lenders. I described the forged power of attorney document Rachel had used to try and breach my secure safe deposit box. Finally, I pointed to the lab report detailing the lethal heart-stopping compound she had attempted to feed me under the guise of a loving daughter. Gregory read through the documents meticulously, his seasoned expression hardening into a mask of pure professional fury with every passing second. He took off his silver reading glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose, and looked at me. "Harrison," he said, his voice hushed and incredibly urgent. "This is attempted murder and felony financial fraud. We need to call the authorities right now. We need to get a police escort directly to your house and throw them out onto the street." I shook my head, my jaw clenched tightly. If we call the police now, Rachel will cry. Derek will play the innocent husband. They will claim they bought those supplements online from an untrusted vendor and had absolutely no idea they were dangerous. The police will take a basic report, but they will not arrest them tonight without hard, irrefutable proof of their malicious intent. Gregory sighed heavily. "You are right," he admitted. "But Harrison, you cannot go back to that house. We have to formally evict them immediately." "Evict them," I scoffed bitterly. "I want to change the locks and throw their luggage onto the lawn today." "You absolutely cannot do that," Gregory cautioned. "Under Virginia law, they have established squatter and tenant rights. A civil eviction could easily take up to 6 full months. 6 months. I stared at him, the terrifying absurdity of the legal system washing over me. I would be a helpless prisoner in my own sanctuary waiting for the executioner to strike. "To remove them tonight, you need them removed in handcuffs for a violent felony," Gregory explained to me quietly. I looked down at my scarred, calloused hands on the table. To survive, I had to become the predator. "I am going back to that house," I stated firmly, "and I am going to get your undeniable evidence tonight." I left the steakhouse with a cold, absolute clarity that I had not felt since my days managing high-stakes construction sites. I drove back to my sprawling estate, my mind constructing the blueprint of my trap. When I walked through the front door, I forced my facial muscles to relax, painting on the expression of a tired, accommodating father. Rachel was in the kitchen, casually flipping through a magazine. Derek was lounging on my custom sofa, his feet propped disrespectfully on the mahogany coffee table. I took a slow, deep breath, mentally preparing myself for the difficult performance ahead. I had to strictly convince them that their poisonous, fabricated reality was working perfectly without a single hitch. I walked into the room, letting out a heavy, exaggerated sigh. "Listen to me, both of you," I said, making sure my tone sounded weary and defeated. "I know things have been incredibly tense since you arrived. I am not used to sharing my space, and I know I have been difficult." Rachel looked up, feigning a look of sympathetic concern. "Oh, Dad, you have not been difficult," she lied smoothly. "We are just so grateful to be here." I nodded, playing the fool to perfection. Well, I think we all need a little breathing room, I continued. My old fishing buddy invited me down to Chesapeake Bay for the weekend. We are going to take his boat out, do some deep-sea fishing, and just disconnect for a few days. I will be leaving first thing tomorrow morning and will not be back until late Sunday night. The change in their body language was instantaneous and deeply sickening. Derek actually sat up, a genuine spark of excitement flashing in his eyes before he quickly masked it. Rachel rushed over and threw her arms around my neck. "That sounds completely wonderful, Dad," she cooed, pressing a fake kiss to my cheek. "You deserve a relaxing getaway. Do not worry about a thing here. We will hold down the fort." "I am sure you will," I thought, suppressing the urge to shove her away. I spent the rest of the evening packing a canvas duffel bag with fishing gear, waterproof boots, and heavy sweaters. I made a grand show of loading my truck the next morning, waving goodbye to my daughter and son-in-law as they stood on the front porch performing the roles of grateful children. I pulled out of the long driveway and drove away. But I did not head east toward the coast. Instead, I drove 10 miles to a deserted commercial parking lot and waited. I pulled out my secure phone and made a call to an old friend named Jackson. Jackson and I had worked together on several high-security government contracts over the decades. He was an ex-military intelligence officer who now ran an elite private security firm catering to corporate executives. I had called him late last night to explain the dire situation, and he had mobilized his best technical crew immediately. 30 minutes later, a plain, unmarked gray utility van pulled into the parking lot and parked directly next to my truck. Jackson rolled down his window, handing me a small digital tracker. I had slipped a GPS bug into the lining of Rachel's expensive handbag before I left the house. We watched the glowing dot on the screen. We waited for 2 agonizing hours before the tracking dot finally moved. Rachel and Derek were leaving the estate, heading toward a high-end shopping district in Fairfax. They were undoubtedly celebrating their newfound freedom, spending money they did not have while they plotted my demise. Once they were several miles away, I signaled Jackson. We drove in tandem back to my property. I used my physical keys to bypass the alarm system, leading Jackson and his 2 silent technicians inside. We had a tight 60-minute window to complete the operation. The technicians moved with breathtaking military precision. They did not carry bulky cameras or obvious wires. They carried small, completely mundane objects: standard white USB wall chargers, smoke detectors, a digital alarm clock. Jackson explained that these were military-grade cloud-based recording devices. They recorded in high definition, captured crystal-clear audio, and transmitted the encrypted feed directly to a secure server. They required no internal batteries as they drew their power directly from the electrical outlets. I directed the first technician to the main living room. He quickly swapped out the standard wall outlet cover near the television with a dual USB charging port. It offered a perfect, unobstructed view of the entire seating area. The second technician moved to the kitchen, replacing a ceiling smoke detector with an identical unit that contained a microscopic 360-degree camera. It covered the marble island, the refrigerator, and the exact spot where Rachel had thrown away my life-saving medication. Finally, I led Jackson down the hall to my private study. This was the most critical location. This was the room Derek had been measuring in the dead of night. Jackson replaced the digital clock on my mahogany desk with a specialized unit aiming the hidden lens directly at my heavy metal safe. He then installed a secondary USB charger near the doorframe to capture the face of anyone attempting to pick the lock or breach the heavy wood. The entire installation took 45 minutes. We left no trace of our presence. Not a speck of drywall dust, not a single footprint on the carpet. I locked the front door, feeling a profound sense of shifting power. For the past 3 days, I had been a helpless victim in my own home, reacting to their lies, constantly looking over my shoulder. Now I possessed the all-seeing eyes they knew nothing about. I shook Jackson's hand in the driveway, thanking him for his flawless execution. I climbed back into my truck and drove to a small, nondescript motel on the outskirts of town. I paid for the room in cash, locked the heavy door, and sat down on the edge of the stiff bed. I pulled out my laptop, connecting to the secure, encrypted network Jackson had provided. The screen flickered to life, dividing into multiple high-definition video feeds. I could see my living room, my kitchen, and my private study in absolute clarity. The audio feed picked up the ambient hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I sat there, in the dim light of the motel room, watching my empty house, waiting for the rats to return to the trap. I was no longer the confused, accommodating father. I was no longer the aging contractor they thought they could easily manipulate and murder. The dynamic had fundamentally changed. They thought they had the entire weekend to execute their dark, sinister agenda without any supervision. They thought they were operating in total secrecy. But as I watched the live video feeds illuminate the shadows of my home, a cold, hard resolve solidified in my chest. I was no longer reacting to their treachery. I was officially hunting them. I sat in the dim light of the cheap motel room, watching the empty feeds of my house on the bright screen. I had the cameras, and I had the tracking device, but observing them was simply not enough. I needed to know exactly what they were planning and how they intended to execute it. I needed undeniable proof of their malicious intent to present to the authorities. If they were willing to poison me to inherit my estate, they needed a compelling reason to act quickly. I needed to give them a target so incredibly tempting that they would abandon caution and rush their timeline. I needed a flawless bait. I opened a new document on my laptop and began to meticulously craft a counterfeit financial record. Utilizing my 4 decades of experience reviewing corporate financial statements, I designed a perfect replica of a premium banking summary. I formatted the document to display a massive recent liquidation of my long-term mutual funds. The fake statement showed a staggering sum of exactly $1,500,000 sitting entirely liquid and completely unsecured in a standard checking account. To anyone looking, it would appear as though I was preparing to make a massive cash purchase, leaving the funds completely vulnerable to a rapid transfer. This document would seal their fate. I checked the tracking application on my secure phone. Rachel and Derek were still many miles away, browsing the expensive boutiques in the Fairfax shopping district. I had a narrow, dangerous window of opportunity. I closed my laptop, grabbed my truck keys, and drove swiftly back to my property. I parked my heavy truck deep in the dense woods behind the estate, ensuring it remained completely hidden from the main road. I slipped through the back entrance, moving silently through the house I had built with my own 2 hands. I went straight into my private study and powered on my heavy office printer. The machine hummed to life, printing the fraudulent bank statement with crisp, official-looking black ink. I took the warm paper and folded it carefully, slipping it into a thick manila folder on my heavy mahogany desk. I intentionally left the top right corner of the document protruding just enough to clearly display the massive account balance and the routing numbers. It was a visual magnet for greedy, desperate eyes. I turned off the printer, walked out of the study, and engaged the heavy brass deadbolt. I tested the handle firmly to ensure it was securely locked. I then slipped back out the rear door and returned to my hidden truck, driving safely back to the motel before they ever realized I had returned. Back in the sterile confines of the motel room, I positioned my tablet on the small desk and prepared for a very long evening. The sun slowly dipped below the tree line, plunging my empty house into deep, menacing shadows. On the screen, the high-definition infrared cameras automatically adjusted, rendering the dark rooms in crisp, glowing detail. At 8 o'clock, the front door finally swung open. Rachel and Derek returned, their arms heavily laden with expensive designer shopping bags. They moved through the spacious living room, completely unaware of the invisible lens tracking their every single movement. I watched them eat a lavish dinner they had ordered, drinking expensive wine and laughing together without a care in the world. It was a sickening, infuriating display of entitlement and deceit. They truly believed I was shivering on a cold boat in the Chesapeake Bay, leaving my entire estate completely unguarded. As the long hours ticked by, the massive house grew completely quiet. At 10 o'clock, they retreated to the guest suite for the night. I did not move from my uncomfortable chair. I kept my eyes locked entirely on the live feed, displaying the dark hallway outside my private study. I knew Derek could not resist the overwhelming temptation. I knew the locked door was an invitation he simply had to accept. The digital clock on my tablet screen ticked to exactly midnight. The house was shrouded in absolute unbroken silence. Suddenly, a shadow shifted at the far end of the long hallway. Derek stepped into the clear frame, dressed entirely in dark clothing. He moved with practiced, deliberate stealth, making absolutely no sound as he approached the heavy oak door of my study. Rachel followed closely behind him, clutching a small tactical flashlight in her trembling hand. Derek knelt gracefully in front of the locked brass handle. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black leather pouch. He unrolled it slowly, revealing a professional set of steel lockpicks. My jaw clenched violently as I watched my son-in-law skillfully insert the tension wrench into my secure deadbolt. He was not a failed tech entrepreneur struggling to pay a business loan. He was an experienced, highly calculated criminal. Within 30 agonizing seconds, the heavy lock clicked with a sickening thud. Derek slowly pushed the door open, stepping confidently into my private sanctuary. Rachel slipped in right behind him, softly closing the door to avoid arousing any external suspicion. The hidden camera installed inside the digital clock on my desk captured their faces perfectly. They moved directly toward the mahogany desk, their eyes sweeping rapidly over my personal files and documents. Rachel swept her flashlight beam across the polished wood surface, and the bright light immediately caught the protruding edge of the manila folder. Derek reached out quickly and pulled the fake bank statement free from its resting place. I watched the live feed intently as their eyes widened in absolute shock. They were completely captivated by the $1,500,000 sitting right in front of them. Derek tapped the paper, pointing eagerly to the routing numbers and the massive total. Rachel covered her mouth with her hand, a wide, sinister smile breaking across her face. They began whispering to each other, their voices barely picked up by the sensitive microphone, but their greedy intentions were undeniably clear. They had found the exact treasure they were searching for. The bait had been taken completely and totally. Now the final phase of my carefully constructed plan could begin. They had broken into my locked room, and they had found the fraudulent money. They were about to make a fatal mistake. I turned the volume up on my tablet, pressing the speaker close to my ear. Derek traced the printed ink with his finger, his voice shaking with pure adrenaline. "Look at this, Rachel," he muttered. "It is completely unsecured. If we can initiate the wire transfer by tomorrow morning, we will have more than enough to pay off Apex funding and disappear for good." Rachel leaned in, her eyes gleaming with cold malice. "But we have to act fast," she whispered back. "He comes back on Sunday. We need to make sure he takes his new supplement the moment he walks through the front door. Once he has his little heart attack, the money is ours." I recorded every single syllable, smiling in the darkness of the motel room. My trap had snapped shut perfectly. I sat frozen in the stiff chair of that cheap motel room, the glowing screen of my tablet illuminating the dark space around me. For a fleeting fraction of a second, a profound and agonizing sorrow washed over my soul. This was my flesh and blood standing in my private sanctuary, conspiring to end my existence for a sum of money. My heart physically ached remembering the little girl who used to hold my hand while we walked through the hardware store, marveling at the aisles of tools and lumber. I wondered exactly when that innocent child had died, replaced by the calculating, ruthless woman currently standing on my screen. But that brief wave of grief evaporated almost as quickly as it had arrived. The sorrow was completely consumed by a cold, radiating fury. My heart turned to absolute ice. I was no longer a grieving father mourning the loss of his family. I was a man fighting for his literal survival, watching two desperate predators seal their own inevitable fate. The hidden camera Jackson had installed inside the digital clock performed flawlessly. The high-definition infrared feed captured every bead of sweat forming on Derek's forehead, every nervous twitch of Rachel's hands. More importantly, the audio was crystal clear. The sensitive microphone picked up their frantic whispers, broadcasting their darkest secrets directly into my quiet motel room. I leaned closer to the speaker, unwilling to miss a single syllable of their damning confession. Derek was pacing back and forth across the perimeter of my mahogany desk, clutching the counterfeit bank statement as if it were a winning lottery ticket. "We have to do it this weekend, Rachel," he urged, his voice trembling, with a mixture of raw panic and sudden greed. "We cannot wait any longer. I do not just owe $50,000. You know the truth. We cannot keep pretending this is just a minor business hiccup." Rachel grabbed his arm, her face twisting into a mask of pure desperation. "Keep your voice down," she hissed sharply, glancing toward the locked door. "I know what we owe Derek, but we have to be smart about this." Derek shook his head violently, running his free hand through his messy hair. "Smart, Rachel, there is no more time to be smart." He countered, his words spilling out in a frantic rush. "I owe Apex Funding $1.2 million. $1.2 million. It is not a small business loan. It was an illegal, highly leveraged margin call on a cryptocurrency exchange that went completely under. I borrowed hard mob money to cover the margin, thinking the market would rebound. It did not rebound. The money is gone, evaporated into thin air. And those animals at Apex do not care about market fluctuations. They care about their capital, and they care about the massive interest I have been dodging for the last 3 months." I sat back in my chair, the sheer magnitude of his stupidity leaving me briefly speechless. $1.2 million. The $50,000 story had been a pathetic, superficial lie designed to gain entry into my home. He had gambled with shadows, borrowing vast sums of illegal cash from dangerous men to play a volatile digital market. He had lost everything, and now he had brought the criminal underworld directly to my front doorstep. "They gave me 10 days, Rachel," Derek continued, his voice dropping to a terrified, breathless whisper. 10 days. The man who met me outside the coffee shop last week was not a collector. He was an enforcer. He told me that if I do not wire them the full balance by the end of next week, they are not going to take me to court. They are going to take me out to the woods. They will kill me, Rachel. They will kill both of us, just to make a point to their other debtors. We are out of options." Rachel let out a shuddering breath, her eyes darting back to the fake bank statement resting on the desk. "I know, Derek. I know they are going to kill us," she replied, her tone completely devoid of any basic human empathy. "That is exactly why my father has to die first. He has lived a long, comfortable life. He has millions just sitting around in these accounts doing absolutely nothing while we are facing execution. It is not fair. He owes us this. We are his family. He should want to save us." The sheer audacity of her rationalization made my blood boil. She had twisted her own horrific greed into a warped sense of entitlement. She actually believed I deserved to be murdered so they could erase a debt created by Derek's monumental arrogance. I tried to do this the clean way, Rachel argued, her voice gaining a defensive, angry edge. "I went to the bank yesterday. I had the power of attorney documents completely forged and ready to go. I paid a man $1,000 to falsify the notary stamps and the signature verifications. I thought I could just walk into the branch, present the paperwork to Sarah, and initiate a $2 million reverse mortgage on this entire estate. I had the routing numbers prepared. We could have drained the equity from this house, paid off Apex Funding, and been on a plane to Europe by Monday morning. He would have never known until the bank came to foreclose." Derek scoffed, a bitter, resentful sound. "But it did not work, did it?" he snapped back. "Your brilliant plan failed." It was that idiot manager Sarah. Rachel spat venom dripping from every word. She flagged the notary seal. She claimed it looked suspicious and refused to process the reverse mortgage application. She said she needed my father to appear in person to verify the transaction. If she had just processed the paperwork, we would not have to use the supplements. We could have just taken the equity and left him with the debt. But now she has forced our hand. If we do not wire the funds by Thursday, we are dead. We have to use the chemical compound. We have to trigger the heart attack before he checks his accounts and sees the attempted mortgage inquiry. Derek nodded slowly, his eyes locked onto the printed numbers of my fake bank statement. He tapped the paper repeatedly. Look at this, Rachel. He has $1.5 million sitting in a liquid checking account. It is just sitting there. If he suffers a massive heart attack on Sunday night, you become the sole executor of the estate by Monday morning. The will explicitly states you take immediate control of all liquid assets upon his passing. We can transfer this cash directly to Apex Funding before the autopsy is even scheduled. It is the perfect setup. We just have to make sure he takes the pill. I sat in the darkness of my motel room, the recorded conversation echoing in my ears. The puzzle was finally complete. Every single jagged piece had fallen perfectly into place for my final trap tonight. I sat in the stifling silence of the motel room, my eyes fixed on the glowing screen of my tablet. The trap had snapped shut perfectly, but the sheer venom pouring from the hidden speakers was still difficult to fully comprehend. Derek stood frozen by my mahogany desk, his trembling fingers clutching the fabricated bank statement. The lure of $1,500,000 had completely derailed whatever cautious instincts he possessed. But it was Rachel who truly commanded the room. My own flesh and blood, the child I had raised with every ounce of love I possessed, paced across the Persian rug like a caged predator. Her face, usually so carefully arranged into an expression of sweet innocence, was now twisted into a mask of absolute malice. The dim light of the study cast harsh shadows across her features, highlighting a cold, calculating darkness I had never seen before. She snatched the fake document from her husband's hands, her eyes scanning the impressive numbers with a hungry, desperate intensity. "This changes everything," she murmured, her voice vibrating with a chilling certainty. "We do not need the bank anymore. The reverse mortgage is completely dead." Sarah made sure of that with her pathetic rules and her annoying notary checks. But this, she tapped the paper sharply, this is completely liquid. This is exactly what we need to get Apex Funding off our backs forever. Derek swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously in his throat. He looked around the locked study as if expecting the walls to suddenly close in on them. "But how do we access it, Rachel?" he whispered, his voice pitching higher with panic. "We do not have his account passwords. We do not have his secure tokens. We cannot just walk into the branch and ask for a cashier's check. They already turned you away once. If we push too hard, they will call the police and we will end up in a federal prison cell before the mob even gets a chance to find us." Rachel let out a sharp, condescending laugh that made my stomach physically turn. "We do not need his passwords while he is breathing. Derek," she said, her tone dripping with icy condescension. "We just need him gone. Once he is pronounced dead, the estate automatically defaults to me. I am the sole heir. The bank will have no choice but to grant me immediate executive control over every single liquid asset he possesses." She stepped closer to him, her eyes locking onto his with a terrifying intensity. "So tell me right now, did you up his dosage today?" Derek shifted his weight uncomfortably, his eyes darting toward the floor. "Yes," he replied, his voice barely a murmur. "I swapped the capsules this morning just like we planned. I put the concentrated dose right into that fancy silver pill box you bought. I watched him take it right before he went to the bank. He swallowed it with his orange juice. He did not suspect a single thing. And you are absolutely sure it will work?" Rachel pressed, stepping even closer, her posture aggressively demanding. "You promised me this would be clean, Derek. You promised me it would not look like a homicide." "It is clean." Derek shot back, a defensive edge finally breaking through his cowardice. "The chemist I bought it from guaranteed the results. It is a highly specialized synthetic compound. It absorbs directly into the bloodstream and causes a massive untraceable cardiac arrest. It elevates the blood pressure so fast, the heart simply gives out. He took a massive dose this morning. With a man his age, it should happen any day now. It could happen tonight on that stupid fishing trip he took. It could happen the moment he walks back through the front door. But when it happens, any medical examiner in the state of Virginia will just write it off as a tragic natural heart attack. There is absolutely no chemical residue left behind for a toxicology screen to find. We are completely safe. I sat in the dark, my breath caught in my chest as I listened to the clinical, detached way they discussed my impending murder. They were not talking about a human being. They were not talking about a father who had paid for tuitions, funded lavish weddings, and provided a safe haven in their darkest hour. They were talking about an obstacle, a fleshy, breathing roadblock standing between them and a massive pile of unearned cash. The complete lack of hesitation, the utter absence of guilt, was the most horrifying aspect of all. Rachel nodded slowly, a dark satisfaction settling over her features. "Good," she said coldly, "because we are out of time. Apex Funding is not making idle threats. They will torture you, Derek, and they will probably torture me just to make you watch. We need him dead by Sunday night." Derek ran a shaky hand across his face, his breathing shallow and rapid. I know, he stammered. But what if it happens here? What if he drops dead in the hallway? I was measuring the distances the other night, trying to figure out the angles from his bedroom to the staircase. If he falls in the corridor, the paramedics might find it suspicious. They might ask questions about why he was wandering around. Rachel slapped him hard on the shoulder, the sudden sound echoing sharply through the hidden microphone. "Are you an absolute idiot?" she hissed, her voice dripping with pure venom. "Stop being such a pathetic coward." Measuring the hallway. "You looked like a complete fool creeping around with a laser pointer at 3 in the morning. If he drops in the hallway, you do not panic. You do not call an ambulance immediately. You grab him by the arms and you drag his heavy body into the master bedroom. You throw him on the mattress and you make it look like he passed away peacefully in his sleep. You do whatever it takes to secure this money. Do you understand me? You have to be ready to drag his corpse if you want to survive the week." Derek flinched, nodding submissively under his wife's ruthless command. "I understand," he whispered. "I will handle the body. I will make sure the scene is perfect." I closed my laptop with a soft, deliberate click, cutting off the visual feed of the two monsters standing in my sanctuary. The silence of the motel room rushed back in heavy and profound. I leaned my head back against the cheap headboard, staring up at the water-stained ceiling. I felt a single hot tear trace a slow path down my weathered cheek. It was the absolute last tear I would ever shed for Rachel. The daughter I had loved, the vibrant, smiling girl who used to hold my hand, was officially dead. She had been completely consumed by an unimaginable greed, leaving behind a hollow, sociopathic shell wearing her face. I sat alone in the darkness, the profound heartbreak slowly crystallizing into an unbreakable diamond, hard resolve. They thought they had orchestrated the perfect crime. They believed they held all the cards waiting patiently for my heart to stop beating so they could gorge themselves on my life savings. They were utterly convinced that their fabricated reality was secure. But they had no idea that I held the toxicology report. They had no idea that I had recorded every single syllable of their murderous confession. And they had absolutely no idea the magnitude of the storm I was about to unleash upon them. I was no longer a grieving father. I was the architect of their impending destruction. I kept my eyes locked on the glowing screen of my tablet, watching the scene unfold in my study. The initial shock of discovering the fake bank statement had worn off, replaced by a frantic, suffocating panic radiating from Derek. He was practically vibrating with nervous energy, his hands running through his hair as he paced the length of the Persian rug. The $1.5 million I had dangled in front of them was a lifeline, but the timeline was a noose slowly tightening around his neck. Rachel stood perfectly still, her arms crossed defensively over her chest, watching her husband unravel. The silence between them was thick with unspoken accusations and mounting terror. Derek finally stopped pacing and slammed his fists onto my mahogany desk, the sudden noise causing the audio feed to crackle sharply in my earpiece. "The chemical is taking entirely too long, Rachel," he said, his voice dropping an octave into a harsh, ragged whisper. "You said it would happen in a matter of days. He has been taking that powder every single morning and he still looks completely fine. He is walking around, driving his truck, going fishing. He is not slowing down. The mob is not going to wait for his cardiovascular system to eventually give out. They want their money by Thursday. If we do not have full executive control of the estate by Monday morning, we will not have enough time to initiate the wire transfers and clear the international holding accounts." Rachel let out a long, exasperated breath, her frustration bleeding through the speakers. "I am giving him the maximum recommended dose, Derek," she hissed, leaning over the desk to glare at him. "The chemist specifically warned me that if we administer too much at once, it leaves trace markers in the hepatic system. A smart medical examiner would instantly flag the liver toxicity, and we would both be facing a murder investigation instead of counting our inheritance. We have to maintain the illusion of a natural cardiac event. We need the narrative to remain clean." But Derek violently shook his head, rejecting her logic completely. "Clean does not matter if we are buried in a shallow grave before the week is over," he argued desperately. "Apex funding operates on a strict schedule. They are ruthlessly efficient. I received another message on my encrypted phone just an hour ago. They are tracking my movements, Rachel. They know exactly where we are sleeping. We cannot rely on a slow-acting poison anymore. His heart is apparently stronger than the chemist anticipated. We need a definitive guarantee. We need an immediate catastrophic event that leaves absolutely zero room for survival and zero room for suspicion. We need a secondary strategy right now tonight, before he comes back from that fishing trip." Rachel uncrossed her arms, her posture stiffening. "And what exactly do you propose?" she demanded coldly. "You are the one who brought this nightmare to our doorstep. If you have a brilliant solution to expedite his death without landing us in a federal penitentiary, I am fully ready to hear it." Derek leaned closer to her, his eyes darting toward the locked door behind them. "I have been thinking about his commercial construction projects," he whispered, his voice trembling with dark excitement. "He is still actively consulting on the new high-rise development downtown, the massive glass and steel tower project on Fifth Avenue." Rachel narrowed her eyes, clearly unimpressed. "What does a construction site have to do with our immediate problem?" she asked dismissively. "Everything," Derek replied, a sinister smile slowly creeping across his face. "You know the protocol. When a building is in the final phases of structural framing, the upper floors are completely open to the elements. They use temporary safety railings, usually heavy steel brackets, bolted directly into the concrete slab. I have been out to that specific site twice this month to drop off lunch for him. I know exactly how those brackets are secured. They use standard industrial bolts. If a person were to loosen the bolts on a specific section of the railing on the 20th floor, the structure would look perfectly secure to the naked eye. But the moment any significant weight leaned against it, the entire barrier would completely give way." Rachel remained silent, processing the lethal mechanics of his idea. Derek took a deep breath and outlined the rest of his horrifying trap. "We keep giving him the synthetic powder," he explained eagerly. "The chemical causes severe dizziness, vertigo, and sudden spikes in blood pressure before the final cardiac arrest hits. I invite him up to the 20th floor to review the perimeter framing. We stand near the edge. The elevation, the open air, and the chemical compound will trigger a dizzy spell. He will naturally reach out for the safety railing to steady himself. When he leans his weight against the loosened brackets, the steel will snap. He falls 20 stories to the pavement below. It is the ultimate tragic accident. An aging contractor loses his balance on a dangerous job site. The police will simply rule it a terrible workplace fatality. The insurance policies will pay out immediately, and you inherit the entire estate instantly. I watched my daughter absorb the horrifying details of this new mechanical assassination plot. Her face remained entirely blank for several long seconds. I waited, holding my breath, hoping against all reason that this violent, brutal concept would finally shatter her greed and awaken her conscience. Instead, Rachel slowly nodded her head. "It is incredibly risky," she murmured, her voice steady and calculating. "But it is definitively faster. Are you absolutely certain you can loosen the bolts without drawing attention from the site foreman?" Derek nodded enthusiastically, eager to prove his worth. "I can do it easily," he assured her. "The site is practically a ghost town during the early morning hours before the heavy machinery crews arrive. I can manipulate the hardware in less than 5 minutes." A wave of absolute cold washed over my entire body, freezing the blood in my veins. The calculated cruelty of their conversation was sickening, but the timing was what truly stopped my heart. I pulled my scheduling ledger from my duffel bag with shaking hands, flipping frantically to the upcoming week. The letters practically leaped off the page, confirming my worst, most immediate fear. I did not have a week to prepare my counterattack. I did not even have a few days. My eyes locked onto the bold ink of my Monday morning itinerary. Tomorrow morning at exactly 8 o'clock, I was scheduled to perform a comprehensive structural walkthrough of the 20th floor perimeter at the 5th Avenue high-rise project. And right beside my name on the official calendar, listed as my designated safety escort for the morning inspection, was Derek. I was scheduled to step into his trap in exactly 8 hours. I stared at the screen as they finalized my execution. Realizing the hunt had just violently accelerated, I did not waste a second. I reached for my phone and dialed Gregory Holt. It was past 1 in the morning, a time when most men were deep in sleep, but Gregory answered on the second ring. His voice was thick with exhaustion, but the sheer panic in my tone snapped him awake instantly. I told him I had secured the evidence we discussed, but the timeline had shifted. They were planning to execute their final move in less than 8 hours. I instructed him to meet me at my corporate office downtown, a building I owned and secured with my own personnel. I packed my equipment into my duffel bag, left the motel, and drove through the deserted streets of Alexandria with focus. When I arrived at the corporate plaza, Gregory was waiting in the lobby, dressed in a hastily thrown-on trench coat over his pajamas. We took the private elevator up to the top floor in total silence. Once inside my executive suite with the heavy acoustic doors locked firmly behind us, I opened my laptop and connected the tablet. I did not offer any dramatic preamble. I simply pressed play and let the raw, unfiltered evil of my daughter and her husband fill the quiet room. Gregory sat completely frozen in the leather guest chair. The color drained entirely from his face as he listened to Rachel ruthlessly detail her desire for my death, and Derek enthusiastically outline his mechanical trap for the 20th floor of the 5th Avenue project. When the video finally ended, a heavy, suffocating silence descended upon the office. Gregory took off his silver glasses, his hands trembling slightly as he rubbed his tired eyes. He had been a prosecutor for over a decade. He had seen the darkest, most depraved corners of human nature. But watching a daughter clinically plan her own father's assassination for mob money was a profound shock to his legal system. "Harrison," he finally whispered, his voice thick with horror. "This is the most cold-blooded, calculated conspiracy I have ever witnessed in my entire career. They are actively hunting you." I nodded slowly, turning the laptop screen away. "Then we call the police right now," I stated firmly. "We show them this clear footage, we hand over the toxicology report from Dr. Aris, and we have them arrested before the sun comes up. I want them in handcuffs, Gregory. I want them removed from my property tonight." But Gregory slowly shook his head, a grim, apologetic expression settling over his features. "It is not that simple, Harrison," he explained, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the polished desk. "The legal system does not move at the speed of our personal outrage. This footage is incredibly damning, yes. It perfectly proves a conspiracy to commit murder. But building a solid conspiracy case takes vital time. The police will need to secure formal warrants, he continued. They will need to subpoena bank records to verify the Apex funding debt. They will need to bring in detectives to analyze the audio and coordinate with the district attorney. Furthermore, proving the poison plot is legally complex. You possess the capsule, but they can claim you tampered with it yourself to frame them. If we hand this over right now, the police might bring them in for questioning, but any defense attorney will have them out on bail by tomorrow afternoon. They will be free. They will know you are onto them, and they will become more dangerous. I stared at him, the frustration bubbling up in my chest. You are telling me I have them on tape planning my murder, and the law cannot protect me tonight, I asked, my voice rising in anger. I am telling you the law requires process, Gregory replied softly. If you want them out of your house tonight, and if you want to ensure they are held without bail, we need an immediate, undeniable offense. We need a violent felony that happens right in front of a camera, something that leaves zero room for defense strategy. You need a felony assault caught on tape. If Derek physically attacks you in an unprovoked rage, the police will arrest him on the spot. With his existing financial desperation and the audio we already have, a judge will deny bail. He will be locked away, and Rachel will be exposed as a willing accomplice. I leaned back in my executive chair, processing the grim reality of his legal advice. I could not wait for the morning. I could not risk stepping onto that active construction site, hoping to outmaneuver a desperate man 20 stories above the pavement. The risk was too immense. Derek was 30 years younger than me, fueled by the sheer terror of his mob deadline. If a physical struggle occurred on that exposed ledge, gravity would not care about my anger. I had to control the environment. I had to bring the battle back to my own territory, where I held all the advantages. I looked at the monitor of my laptop, visualizing the layout of my study, the hidden cameras, the lock. I had a dangerous plan forming in my mind, a reckless gambit that required flawless execution to succeed. If a felony assault is what we need to put them away tonight, I said, my voice dropping to an icy register, then I will give them the opportunity to commit one. I am going back to the estate. Gregory stood up, his eyes wide with alarm. Harrison, no, he pleaded, stepping toward the desk. That is reckless. You are walking into a house with two people who are trying to kill you. You do not know what Derek is capable of if he is pushed into a corner. I stood up to meet his gaze, my posture rigid. I know what he is capable of, Gregory. He is a coward. He uses poison and loosened bolts because he is terrified of a physical confrontation. But if I take away his options, if I strip away his illusions of safety and trap him in his own lies, his panic will override his cowardice. He will lash out. I will make sure he does. And when he does, my cameras will capture every second of his violence. I packed my tablet back into the thick duffel bag, my movements sharp and precise. I instructed Gregory to drive to the local police precinct and wait in the parking lot. I told him to keep his phone in his hand and eagerly wait for my signal. Once Derek finally took the bait and initiated the assault, I would trigger the emergency alert. Gregory would walk into the station, present the live feed of the attack, and demand an immediate armed police response. There would be absolutely no warrants required, no lengthy investigations, no bail hearings. It would be a brutal, undeniable crime in progress. I walked out of the corporate plaza and into the cool, dark night, ready to spring the final trap. The time for waiting and passively watching was over. I was going home to confront the monsters living under my roof. The drive back to my estate was a surreal journey through the darkest corners of my own mind. The sun was just beginning to dip below the tree line, casting streaks of crimson across the evening sky. I had called Gregory from the road, confirming he was in position at the precinct waiting for my signal. I parked my heavy truck in the driveway, taking one final breath to center my racing heart. I was stepping onto a battlefield disguised as my dining room. I grabbed my canvas duffel bag, slumping my shoulders to perfect the illusion of an exhausted, unsuspecting old man returning from a long, grueling trip. My excursion had supposedly been cut short by severe engine trouble. I unlocked the heavy front door and stepped slowly into the grand foyer. The house was unnervingly quiet, echoing with the polished emptiness of a tomb. I knew Rachel and Derek were upstairs in the guest suite finalizing mental preparations for my funeral. I walked directly into the formal dining room, my eyes scanning the space with the tactical precision of a commander. This room was the stage for their undoing, and I needed to control every variable within it. I moved quietly, my boots making no sound on the thick Persian rug. My first priority was removing potential weapons from the vicinity. Derek was a coward, but a cornered coward, with a weapon could inflict fatal damage. I opened the mahogany credenza and methodically removed the heavy silver steak knives, the sharp carving forks, and the crystal centerpieces that normally adorned the long table. I locked them securely in at a lower cabinet, pocketing the small brass key. The dining table was now completely clear of anything sharp or lethal. I arranged the simple porcelain plates and blunt silverware, ensuring the setting looked perfectly normal for a family dinner. Next, I moved to the seating arrangement. I positioned myself confidently at the head of the long table, establishing my authority over the space. Then I walked to the right side, exactly where Derek always sat. I pulled his heavy oak chair out slightly, angling it awkwardly on the rug. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible adjustment, but a crucial tactical advantage. When the confrontation erupted, that heavy oak chair would act as a physical barrier, momentarily obstructing his movement and giving me the precious seconds I needed. With the physical environment secured, I turned my attention to the digital trap. I pulled my iPad from my bag and positioned it carefully on the mantel of the stone fireplace, obscuring the small device behind a large decorative vase. The camera lens had a perfect unobstructed view of the entire dining room, capturing the head of the table and Derek's designated seat. I synced the tablet to the secure cloud server, ensuring every second of footage would be instantly uploaded and preserved. Once the recording light blinked a steady green, I walked into the kitchen and began preparing a simple dinner. I slowly roasted a whole chicken, chopped fresh vegetables, and let the comforting aroma fill the house, masking the tension radiating from my bones. I poured a glass of iced tea and set my silver pillbox prominently on the kitchen island. Right on schedule, I heard heavy footsteps coming down the grand staircase. Rachel and Derek entered the kitchen, stopping dead in their tracks when they saw me standing by the oven. The sheer shock on their faces was immensely satisfying. They had not expected me back until Sunday night. My sudden arrival had fractured their constructed timeline and their precarious nerves. "Dad," Rachel gasped, her hand flying to her chest in a gesture of manufactured surprise. "We did not expect you back so soon. Is everything okay?" I offered a warm, oblivious smile, turning off the oven. "Engine trouble." I lied smoothly, carrying the roasted chicken toward the dining room. The boat broke down miles from shore, and we had to be towed back to the marina. It ruined the weekend, so I just decided to drive home early. I hope you do not mind me interrupting your quiet evening." Derek forced a stiff, unnatural chuckle, his eyes darting nervously around the room. "Not at all, Harrison," he stammered, following me. "We are just glad you are home safe and sound." We took our respective seats at the table. I sat at the head, commanding the room. Rachel sat to my left and Derek moved to the right, adjusting the heavy oak chair exactly as I had anticipated. Before I served the food, Rachel leaned forward, her eyes locking onto my face with terrifying intensity. "Dad," she said, her voice dripping with fake, sickening concern. "Did you remember to take your premium supplements this morning? You know how important your heart health is, especially after a stressful day." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the unmarked silver pillbox she had given me. I popped the lid open, revealing the lethal white capsules resting silently inside the shiny metal casing. "Of course, sweetheart," I replied, my voice steady and completely calm. "I would never forget the special medicine my only daughter bought for me." I picked up a capsule, raised it to my lips, and took a large gulp of iced tea. I made an exaggerated show of swallowing, patting my chest as if the pill had gone down smoothly. In reality, the capsule was securely palmed in my left hand, safely hidden from their greedy, watchful eyes. Rachel let out a slow breath, her shoulders visibly relaxing. A dark, triumphant smile touched the corners of her mouth. She glanced across the table at Derek, and the look they exchanged was utterly chilling. It was a look of sinister anticipation. They believed the poison was finally coursing through my veins. They believed the clock had started ticking down to my imminent death. The tension in the dining room became incredibly thick, heavy, with unspoken malice. We began to eat, the clinking of blunt silverware echoing in the quiet space. Derek could barely touch his food. His leg bounced nervously under the table, his eyes constantly darting toward my chest, waiting for the sudden gasp, the clutching of the heart, the fatal collapse. Rachel sipped her wine, her gaze fixed on me like a vulture circling a dying animal. She kept asking me how I felt, inquiring if I was experiencing any sudden dizziness or shortness of breath during the meal. I played the part flawlessly. I chewed slowly occasionally, rubbing my left arm or taking a deep, ragged breath just to watch their eyes widen with eager anticipation. They were sitting in my house, eating my food actively, waiting for my heart to stop beating so they could steal my lifetime of hard work to pay off a mobster. The absolute depravity of their souls was fully exposed under the bright dining room chandelier. But as the minutes ticked by and my heart continued to beat with a strong, steady rhythm, the triumphant smiles on their faces began to falter. The anticipation warped into confusion, and the confusion rapidly metastasized into raw panic. Their execution deadline was closing in. I watched the color drain completely from Derek's face as the seconds stretched into minutes. He stared at my chest, waiting for a fatal collapse that simply was not going to happen. Rachel gripped the stem of her wineglass so tightly, her knuckles turned a stark bone white. The heavy, oppressive silence in the dining room was broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. It was time. I wiped my mouth slowly with a linen napkin, folded it neatly, and placed it next to my plate. I looked directly at my daughter, dropping the facade of the naive, accommodating father. I reached into the breast pocket of my heavy jacket and pulled out the thick, dark envelope with the silver lettering. I tossed it across the smooth mahogany table. It landed directly on top of Derek's roasted chicken with a soft thud. Apex funding, I said, my voice cutting through the quiet room like a serrated blade. Derek recoiled violently, his chair scraping loudly against the Persian rug. He stared at the ominous black envelope, as if it were a venomous snake coiled on his dinner plate. Before either of them could formulate a single word of denial, I reached into my bag, resting on the floor beside me. I retrieved a thick stack of certified legal documents bound by a heavy brass clip. I slid the paperwork across the table, allowing it to bump gently against Rachel's wineglass. Rachel looked down at the official seal stamped on the top page, her eyes widening in absolute horror. "What is this, Dad?" she stammered, her voice shaking uncontrollably. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the table. "I know everything," I stated coldly, looking back and forth between the two monsters sitting in my home. "I know about the $1.2 million mob debt you owe Derek. I know about the massive illegal cryptocurrency margins you lost. I know the collectors gave you exactly 10 days to pay them back, or they will bury you both in the woods." Derek began to hyperventilate, his chest heaving as he frantically tried to process how his darkest secret had been dragged into the light. "And Rachel," I continued, turning my gaze to my own flesh and blood. "I know all about the poison. I know about the synthetic chemical compound you placed in that silver pillbox. I know you tried to trigger a fatal cardiac arrest so you could inherit my estate and pay off your husband's massive gambling debt." The room plunged into a suffocating, terrifying vacuum. Rachel opened her mouth to speak, to offer some pathetic, fabricated lie, but the sheer weight of my undeniable knowledge crushed the words before they could escape her throat. She simply sat there, paralyzed by the horrific reality that her flawless assassination plot had entirely unraveled. I stood up slowly from my chair at the head of the table, towering over them, with decades of true, absolute authority. You thought I was a clueless old man, I said, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. You thought you could eliminate me and steal my life savings to save yourselves. But you underestimated me. I spent the entire day with my legal team. I just transferred all my assets, this entire estate, and every single cent of my liquid cash into an irrevocable charity trust. You get absolutely nothing, Rachel. You have been completely disinherited. And you have exactly 5 minutes to get out of my house before the mob finds you. The impact of my words struck them with the devastating force of a physical blow. The illusion of their impending wealth shattered instantly, leaving behind nothing but the terrifying reality of their imminent demise. Rachel leaped up from her chair, her face contorting into an ugly, unrecognizable mask of pure hatred. The sweet, loving daughter routine vanished completely, replaced by a vicious, cornered predator. "You cannot do that," she screamed, her voice cracking with hysterical rage. "You cannot give our money away to charity. That money belongs to us." I looked at her with profound disgust. "It is my money, Rachel. I earned every single penny of it through 40 years of grueling labor, while you sat back and expected the world to be handed to you on a silver platter." Rachel slammed her fists onto the dining table, sending her wine glass tipping over. A pool of dark red liquid spilled across the polished wood, dripping onto the rug like fresh blood. "You are so selfish," she shrieked, the raw venom in her voice exposing the true depths of her sociopathy. "You have millions of dollars just sitting in a bank account, doing absolutely nothing. We are your family. We are facing execution. You should be happy to save us. You are a horrible, miserable old man, and you deserve to die." I stood my ground, completely unmoved by her vitriolic outburst. "You ceased being my family the moment you handed me a capsule filled with poison," I replied, my voice dangerously calm. "You made your choice, Rachel. Now you get to live with the fatal consequences of that choice. Your 5 minutes are ticking down. You need to pack whatever you can carry and leave my property immediately, because I am calling the police the second that clock strikes the hour." While Rachel unleashed her horrific entitled rage, Derek remained frozen in his seat. His eyes were wide, unblinking, fixed on the black envelope resting on his plate. The reality of his situation was finally crashing down upon his cowardly shoulders with crushing gravity. The $1.5 million bait I had dangled in front of him was gone. The irrevocable trust meant he had absolutely no avenue left to steal my wealth. He was a dead man walking, and he knew it. The men from Apex Funding were tracking his location. They were waiting for their money, and they would not accept failure. Derek slowly lifted his head, his gaze shifting from the dark envelope to my face. A terrifying primal panic began to replace the cowardice in his eyes. The rational part of his brain, the part that calculated risks and measured hallways in the dead of night, completely shut down. He was no longer a scheming fraudster. He was a trapped animal fighting for his literal survival. "You set us up," he muttered, his voice dropping to a guttural, dangerous growl. "You knew everything, and you still made us believe we had a chance. You lured us into this trap." I stared him down, refusing to break eye contact. "I simply gave you enough rope to hang yourselves, Derek," I stated firmly. "Now get out of my house." Derek stood up slowly, his body trembling with a violent, explosive energy. He looked at the locked cabinet where I had hidden the sharp knives. He looked at the heavy oak chair I had deliberately pulled out from the table. The only path to his survival required eliminating the man standing in front of him. I needed him to take the final step. I needed the violent felony captured perfectly on the hidden cameras, recording every single angle of this dining room. I took a deliberate step toward him, closing the distance and challenging his brittle masculinity. "Are you going to poison my food next?" "Derek," I taunted him, my voice dripping with absolute contempt. "Are you going to try and loosen the safety railing on the 20th floor tomorrow morning? You are a pathetic, miserable failure. You could not even execute a simple murder without botching the entire operation. That was the final spark needed to ignite his volatile powder keg. Derek let out a raw, desperate roar of pure rage. He lunged across the dining table, ignoring the spilled wine and the scattered porcelain plates. He swung his fist wildly, aiming a desperate, heavy blow directly at my jaw. I was older, but I was fully prepared. I stepped backward quickly, allowing his momentum to carry him forward. His foot caught the leg of the heavy oak chair I had strategically angled on the rug. Derek stumbled violently, his balance completely compromised. He crashed into the side of the table, but the primal adrenaline kept him moving. He scrambled to his feet, his face twisted in a murderous frenzy, and launched himself at me again. He tackled me around the waist, his powerful momentum driving us both backward. We slammed into the stone mantel of the fireplace with a bone-rattling thud, directly in front of the hidden camera. I felt his hands close tightly around my throat, his thumbs pressing brutally into my windpipe as he tried to choke the life out of me right there on the floor. The trap was set, and the predator fully committed. My device was actively uploading the violent assault straight to the protected server. I fought back, securing my victory. I shoved my knee upward, with every ounce of strength, catching him squarely in the chest. The sudden impact broke his vicious grip. I gasped for air, scrambling backward across the polished hardwood floor to put distance between us. Derek stumbled, his breath coming in ragged, desperate heaves. His eyes were completely wild, devoid of any rational thought, consumed entirely by the feral instinct to eliminate the threat, standing between him and his own survival. He looked around, his frantic gaze landing on the heavy, solid oak chair I had deliberately pulled out earlier. With a guttural scream that echoed off the high ceilings, he hoisted the massive piece of furniture into the air. He did not hesitate. He hurled the solid wood directly at my head with lethal, uncontrolled force. I could have completely dodged the incoming projectile. My reflexes were sharp enough to duck safely, but I needed this visual evidence to be absolutely irrefutable. I needed the felony assault to be so violently explicit that no defense attorney in the state could possibly argue self-defense or an accidental scuffle. I braced myself and intentionally shifted my weight, leaning just slightly into the trajectory of the flying heavy oak. The thick wooden leg struck a glancing, brutal blow against my forehead. The impact was deafening, a sickening thud that sent a shockwave of white-hot agony through my skull. My vision flashed with bright, blinding light, and I was thrown backward onto the rug. I felt the skin split open instantly. A thick, warm stream of blood poured down my face, blinding my left eye and dripping onto my crisp collar. It was a terrifying, calculated risk, but the searing pain confirmed that the trap had snapped shut flawlessly. The cameras had just recorded a definitive, undeniable felony assault. I scrambled to my feet, using the mantel for support, and bolted out of the dining room before Derek could recover. I sprinted down the hallway, the blood trailing behind me, and threw myself into the heavy oak door of the master bathroom. I slammed the deadbolt shut, just as Derek threw his entire body weight against the wood. The solid frame shuddered under the violent impact. "Open the door," he screamed, his voice pitching into a hysterical, murderous frenzy. Rachel joined him seconds later, her fists pounding relentlessly against the barrier. "You cannot hide from us," she shrieked, her voice stripped of any remaining pretense. The sound of their desperate, violent banging echoed through the small space, but I simply ignored them. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone with blood-stained fingers, and sent a single text message to Gregory Holt, waiting at the police precinct. Phase 1 is complete. I grabbed a white towel from the rack, pressing it firmly against the deep gash on my forehead to stem the bleeding. I did not wait for them to break through the door. I unlatched the frosted glass window above the garden tub, pushed the heavy pane outward, and slipped silently into the cool night air. The drop to the soft mulch below was short, and I landed gracefully, disappearing into the shadows. I moved quickly to my truck, parked near the side gate, started the engine, and drove myself directly toward the hospital emergency room. The flashing neon lights of the medical center guided my path as the adrenaline slowly began to recede, leaving behind a dull, throbbing ache in my head. Inside the sterile brightness of the trauma ward, doctors rushed to clean and stitch the deep laceration across my brow. As the medical staff worked, my phone began to vibrate relentlessly, with incoming updates from Gregory. While I was sitting under the surgical lights, a heavily armed tactical SWAT unit was violently breaching the front doors of my estate. Gregory had marched directly into the precinct, presented the high-definition, cloud-synced video of the brutal assault, and demanded an immediate response. The footage of Derek hurling a massive piece of furniture at an unarmed elderly man was undeniable. The police did not need months to build a conspiracy case. They had a violent, bloody felony occurring in real time. The tactical team swarmed the dining room, pinning Derek to the ground, before he even realized the nightmare had officially arrived. Rachel was handcuffed against the granite countertops of the kitchen, screaming and crying as the officers read them their rights. But the true brilliance of the raid was the subsequent search. When the authorities secured the premises, they systematically cataloged the belongings my daughter and her husband had hastily packed in their panic. Inside Rachel's designer purse, detectives found the pristine silver pillbox containing the concentrated synthetic poison. The chemical matched the exact description detailed in the recorded conversations. Inside Derek's leather briefcase, they uncovered the fabricated bank statements and the forged legal documents he intended to use to seize my corporate assets. The evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable, and perfectly packaged. Gregory arrived at the emergency room just as the doctors were wrapping the final bandage around my head. He walked into my cubicle, a grim but deeply satisfied expression settling over his tired features. "They are in custody, Harrison," he confirmed quietly, pulling up a chair beside my bed. "The local prosecutors are absolutely astounded by the sheer volume of evidence we handed them on a silver platter. The district attorney is moving forward with an entire catalog of severe charges. They are formally charging Derek with first-degree felony assault, attempted murder, and massive financial fraud. Rachel is facing identical conspiracy and attempted murder charges for her role in the poison plot. The video of the attack, combined with the physical poison and the staggering financial motive, painted a picture so vile, the presiding judge did not even hesitate during the emergency arraignment. He completely denied bail for both of them, citing them as severe flight risks and immediate dangers to the community. They were locked away in separate concrete cells in the county holding facility, stripped of their designer clothes and their arrogant illusions. They had lost their freedom, their wealth, and their future in the span of a single evening. But the legal justice system was only the first layer of their impending destruction. The truly terrifying consequence of their failure arrived shortly before dawn. Word moves incredibly fast within the criminal underworld, and the mobsters at Apex Funding were notoriously well connected. The moment the morning news stations broadcasted the high-profile arrest of the disgraced businessman Derek and his conspirator wife, the vicious debt collectors knew exactly where to find him. Derek was no longer a moving target, hiding behind the false security of my estate. He was a sitting duck in a highly populated county lockup. The $1.2 million he owed them was completely unrecoverable, and the cartel did not simply write off bad debts. They demanded immediate violent retribution. Gregory received a secure tip from an informant within the prison system just hours after their incarceration. The word had already been passed down to the internal gang leaders inside the facility. Derek was marked. He would not survive the week. 2 months have now passed since that long and bloody night. I sit alone on my back porch, watching the golden sun sink slowly behind the tree line. The air is crisp and cool, and the estate is finally wrapped in a profound, unbreakable peace. I lift my hand and gently trace the small pale scar resting just above my eyebrow. It is a permanent physical reminder of the exact price I had to pay for my own survival. The heavy oak door behind me opens with a soft click, but there is absolutely no tension left in my shoulders. My phone chimes on the small wicker table. It is a brief, satisfying call from Gregory Holt. He informs me with a grim sense of professional pride that Rachel and Derek officially accepted their plea deals this morning. They both signed away 15 years of their lives in a federal penitentiary to avoid facing a jury trial. The mountain of digital and physical evidence we presented was completely insurmountable. They will spend the next decade and a half locked in concrete cells, stripped of their lavish illusions and their toxic greed. Derek never had to face the wrath of Apex funding on the outside, but prison carries its own brutal justice for cowardly men like him. I end the call and pour myself a small glass of aged bourbon. The amber liquid warms my throat, soothing the last lingering ghosts of my past. I walk down the wooden steps and stroll toward the edge of the vibrant garden. Martha always loved these hydrangeas. I had the entire bed completely replanted last week, restoring the vibrant blue and purple blossoms to their original breathtaking glory. I take a profoundly deep, steadying breath, inhaling the sweet floral scent mixed with the evening dew. Sometimes, to effectively cut out a terminal cancer, you have to be completely willing to let yourself bleed a little. The wound was incredibly deep, but the infection is permanently gone. I am finally breathing easily, standing strong and secure inside my beautiful, quiet, and perfectly protected personal sanctuary. Family is not just defined by blood. It is defined by respect, loyalty, and basic human decency. When those sharing your DNA choose pure greed over your own life, you owe them absolutely nothing. We are taught to sacrifice endlessly for our children, but true wisdom is knowing when to stop being a victim. Do not let emotional blackmail keep you in a toxic, dangerous environment. Protect your peace, protect your legacy, and never underestimate the lengths to which desperate people will go. You have the absolute right to defend your life, even if the enemy sleeps down the hall. If this incredible story kept you firmly on the edge of your seat, hit the like button and subscribe. Have you ever had to cut ties with a toxic family member? Tell me your story in the comments below and let me know where you are actively watching from today.
I used to ride upon your shoulders, thinking you could touch the sky. Every road felt less uncertain when I saw the world through your eyes. You were stronger than the mountains, taller than the northern pines. And when the winter winds were coming, you would stand between them and I. Time kept moving like the river, years slipped slowly out to sea. But no matter where life took me, you were always part of me. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. You taught me strength is not in power, but in kindness when it's hard. You taught me how to keep on going when the road grows cold and dark. Every lesson, every story, every laugh around the flame lies within me like an echo, calling softly through my name. And when I face my greatest battles, when I feel I can't go on, I can hear your voice beside me saying, child, you're stronger than you know. I am my leads me home. One day the snow will cover footprints, one day the fire will burn low, but the things a father gives his daughter are the things that never go. Not the gold or not the stories, not the battles that he won, but the quiet way he loved her and the woman she becomes. I am my father's daughter, and I always will remain. Through every triumph, every loss, through every joy and every pain, the world may change around me, the stars may fade above, but I will always carry with me my father's endless love. And when they ask me who I am, I'll smile and answer softly.